I'm Seth Cluett. I'm artist in residence here at Nokia Bell Labs. I'm also a joint appointed professor at Stevens Institute of Technology in Music and Visual Arts and Technology. This year I'm a visiting professor at Columbia University in the graduate program in Sound Arts. I have been artist in residence here at Nokia Bell Labs since the middle of May this past year, working on projects embedded in research groups, working on demo projects of technologies within the Nokia Bell Labs ecosystem, and then individual art projects. So my lab back at Stevens, SCENE Lab, which stands for Sensory Computation Experimental Narrative Environments, is interested in the development of a field we're referring to as virtual reality acoustics, right? So if you think of the world as the world is, which is well, very real. It is subject to the laws of physics. You put sound into the world and it responds in a certain way. But what if you have a virtual world and that world doesn't have normal physics? What does virtual reality acoustics look like? And so one of the things that I'm thinking about a lot while I'm here is what are some ways of approaching acoustics that go back to things that we ignored or accepted as true in the early process of acoustics. Acoustics suffers from this huge problem of having been solved very early. A lot of, like 95% of the big problems in acoustics were solved by the 1920s, 1930s. Then it was implementation into electrical engineering, but for the most part we understood at least explanatory ways of thinking about the nature of sound in rooms and spaces and open fields. But then that 90% leaves another 10% unexplored, right? The possibility of all the times when those equations don't explain that phenomenon. And so I've been going back over the history of acoustics and trying to find all of the little spots where we just sort of tacitly accept that 90% of the time it's correct, and then put a lot of pressure in my work, both in terms of research and in creative practice, into how we will get at that 10% that doesn't work, and then how do we explain that? Is that happening neurologically? Is it happening as a relationship between the outer ear, the physical room, and the brain in tandem? I have a feeling it's a holistic problem, which is why science ignored it in the first place, which they went in, solved the small problem, and then ignored that it was part of a larger system. And that's that last little 10% that gets us out of the uncanny valley and into a real virtual acoustics, right? So if we're going to solve for virtual spaces that have no physical limits, we have to think about acoustics in different ways, and that's one of the things that I've been working at. So at the moment, I work with two different research groups primarily. They wouldn't call them research groups here, but groups of people interested in common things. One working around ideas of new forms of communication, around haptics in particular. I have a background in multi-sensory research and cognition in my non-art life, and some of that stuff winds its way into my art practice. And in this group of people, we're looking at ways of thinking about what kinds of communication are made possible by touch, what kinds of communication channels are best optimized for kinetics or kinematic engagement with technology. The other group is primarily interested in sort of next generation co-localized spaces for meeting experiences. You might think of it as like conference systems on steroids, where you want to feel like you're in the room with other people, but they're not co-present with you. So how do you extend a location through multimedia technology? How do you make people feel as though they're embedded in real spaces that are essentially virtual? And that relates very closely to some of my own interest in the art world. I make large-scale immersive architectural installations that are embedded in museums and gallery spaces, and then virtual and augmented reality installations that sort of question the nature of space and perception and cognition in those sort of more pointed examples. And so that sort of creative work is super helpful in the context of these research interests, to try to disrupt a little bit some of the normative ways of thinking about how one might accomplish sort of co-location of spaces and those sorts of things. Engineers are constantly sort of inverting my own thinking. For me, I come at things with this sort of divergent, nonlinear, improvised most of the time approach to thought, and someone will very often break a problem down into a tiny little seed and then show me how it gets from the simplest version up to this idea that I have. And that process actually suggests alternate paths that could lead to new ideas. And so I think of like the history of invention as this history of forks not chosen, right? Like there's the fork we chose, and that choice led us to nationwide alternating current, or that choice led us to a personal computer that takes the shape that it does, or that choice leads to a particular form of a phone that sits in your pocket. But at each of those stages where there were choices that were eclipsed because one thing was taken, there was this other path that wasn't opened up. And so by getting back to these sort of first principles from the engineering side, you find all of this potential for invention in paths that weren't taken the first time round. And those become really fruitful territory for art making, but they also then open up territory for like, what if we were to think about wireless electricity? It doesn't work on a large scale, but how can we make that work in the context of Internet of Things, or those sorts of things where there's a latent potential in an eclipse technology that that through the intersection between a nonlinear thinking artist and a linear thinking scientist, somewhere in the middle of that we come up with something interesting. I always get asked about, are you an artist? Are you a composer? Are you a researcher? Are you a teacher? What are you? And I've always thought I'm the idea at the center of all of those things, and each one of those things is a set of tools that are optimized for approaching that idea in one way. And so interdisciplinarity to me is not about bringing disciplines together. It's about coming up with ideas that warrant or are the natural conclusion of a need to bring people together. When I have an idea for a new sound piece, or that manifests itself in a series of photographs, they're both trying to get at a core nodule of an idea that I've been obsessed with for a decade, right? And each medium lends an affordance to communicate about that idea, and so I don't really think there's any such thing as interdisciplinary practices. There's only interdisciplinary ideas, and then there's a number of ways that one can approach the idea.